Now it's been over 20 years since I built and flew my Typhoon with a 4-stroke SAITO 91. Among other unique features, a full carbon fiber fuselage, carbon fiber cowling, a wing built on rods, a lot of standard features like Brodak dope for the finish, typical ink work, but a labor of love. Lots of little details, a removable pilot, among other things. It's just a labor of love, and thank you, Ray Dory, for making this old footage available. Every one of these airplanes is like children are. They're similar, but they're very different. Now, in the past, we've just added pieces, and we've never built a plane dedicated just for a 4-stroke. So what's going to happen, the reality here is, as we go along, certain ideas are going to come to fruition. You're just going to, when you see it, oh yeah, why don't we do it that way? Yeah, well, but we haven't done that yet. We have to think. Drop this line down, and I took this tracing right off the actual spinner, and I'll just do that with a sanding block. Good is just to simulate it, to hold the sanding block at just a little bit of an angle. It seems like as you work around, you can just go right up to the end of the pen line. This is just about what a typical carving, and obviously you could go along for hours with this. I got to work my way right down until I have the last little bit of material. But as I'm doing this, I know I have to start favoring the front and favoring the back at the same time. Semi-roughed out, but what I need to do is in here, because this will have a convoluted shape, I need to put a spacer in here. Right now, just get some scrap balsa to make a spacer, because ultimately that nose is going to have that shape. It's a little bit of a convex shape. So from the one piece of wood I was able to get. Boy, when you look at it big like this. Now I thought this was going to take, you know, a lot of time. Well, what I did, I started improvising different shapes, using templates and using every possible way. And I finally got disgusted. I thought I'd do it with a mechanical device, you know, just trace out that size diameter. I didn't like that. And I wound up putting as many of these shapes, constantly varying the curve, until I thought it looked pretty much like what it should. And now what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to make a plywood template, maybe 64th plywood, and improvise it in here. And then I can carve to that template. The carving. Getting that nose section right, carving it correctly, and making sure I had room for all the hardware, engine, being able to take it apart without having a problem. This is going to be a big 4-stroke in there with a throttle control. So this part of it took a lot longer than you see on the video. So from that carved plug, I made a mold, a female mold, and I wanted to make a carbon fiber cowling. And this went on for a long time because I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to do it, how I wanted to reinforce it, and I had to make sure it went around a very big engine. This airplane was due to have a SAITO 91. I didn't want the fins or the muffler coming out in an awkward position, but getting it out of the mold and then fixing all the flaws. No gel coat. Now, I did not opt for a gel coat mold on this, and I think I made the right decision because the gel coat is usually heavy and adds nothing to the strength, and this came out to be super light. So that was one of the good things that I learned during the making of the Typhoon. I made up the ribs for the wing using a sandwich method. Each rib has a center line and 2 very accurate holes so that it can be slid down the rod one by one. Of course, you see on the table where I've got the lines for where the ribs have to go with a Sharpie marker. When you're done, you can just wipe that off. And this is a really accurate piece of granite that I've got the 2 end pieces with the aluminum holes accurately machined in, very, very accurately glued to the table, so that end of it is not going to move as I put the ribs in. And
believe it or not, one of the things I always have to double and triple check is I'm all done and did I get one rib out of order? Because a lot of times the phone will ring or I run out of coffee or whatever. And all of a sudden, number 7 is where number 2 is or something. And getting this right, when all the ribs are on the rod, this really makes for a very easy way to make the wing, in my opinion. And from this point on, it's very, very easy to check down to the granite plate and make sure you're in very accurate to the center line. What really matters on this whole construction is the center line. If everything is centered and each rib is centered relative to the granite table, the wing is probably going to be pretty good when you're done. Then when I'm all done, I'll make sure the other end is the same way. Now, believe it or not, I got that piece of granite from a tombstone place. If I remember right, we got 3 or 4 of them. We were talking to the guy, and I was hoping to buy one, and he said, just take it. That was pretty good. Maybe we'll give that guy our countertop business. But anyway, this turned out to be for the Typhoon. Remember, this airplane is going to have a SAITO 91. It's going to have a ZTRON. Ultimately, I'm going to want to take off and land with the engine on. And believe it or not, after and Sergio Zegras worked with me on this, I wanted to make sure it was going into a plane that it was worth building a plane for. I didn't want to have all my experimental stuff in a plane that was either too heavy or it had a twisted wing, a warped wing, or something. So I wanted to give it the best shot. Now the Typhoon has that definitive nose, a very short nose moment arm. I could make the plane almost scale. When I laid out the drawings, it was almost scale. And I was very lucky. The plane obviously with a SAITO 91 did not need any nose weight, and the carbon fiber tank for a SAITO 91 only had to be 4 ounces. Now, over many years, I had used the rod method. It's on so many of the videos. And what it is, if you have a flat glass or granite plate, it makes checking the center line on every rib very easy. And if you see it's wandering off in one direction, you can either shim it or re-glue the sheeting to the wing. But once you get that you can work off that center line in the middle, at the edge, in the front, that it's the center line that matters more than anything. The rest of it, it's really easy peasy once you get the center line on. And I can check, I wanted all the reinforcement in the center of the wing, the sheeting. I wanted to have the joints everywhere that I possibly could, the joints as nice as possible. I was anticipating putting a really nice finish on this model, and that every step of the way. And building the wing was with using that jig and with the rod method. The wing just couldn't have come out nicer. It came out under the weight I was looking for, and when I was all done with the silver finish on it, it even weighed less than I anticipated.
When I do it, I try to improvise a little bit, or try to make what I call upgrades, so that ultimately at the end of it, at the end of whatever amount of time I've spent, I have what I hope is the best possible way to pass on. And each year we try to make it a little bit better. And once this is done, and I'm satisfied that it's nice and straight, I'm going to get out my sheeting for the center. Remember, the way this builds strength without weight is by having one sheet tip to tip. That's what I try to lay the ribs on. What I wanted to do, though, is as just a way of maybe making it a little easier, is I have the wood taped in place. Just get my T-square out and trace in the ribs right while it's in this position, because once I join that piece on there, it'll be real difficult to get these angles at 90 degrees, and even though it isn't really critical, you also want to get an accurate center line on there. I'm just trying, even little ways like this, that each step, if you can save 10 minutes here, 10 minutes here, an hour here, in the overall picture, it's just that much easier. Not a, if it's 89.7, it won't be the end of the world, believe me. But because we're working on flat glass, and we've got C grain, and it's taped, it's the taping it in place that seems to help. I mean, this is the way all of the models I wish would go together. Anyway, one of the things I thought of, because this is really one of the ways we're going to be upgrading the Cardinal kit soon, of coming up with a little tail kit, just a kit for making the equivalent of everything but the tips. We're in the middle of getting the ribs laser cut. I guess it wouldn't be that big of a deal to get a bunch of these ribs cut also. Straight block as I can. That's about all we're going to work on tonight. But again, in just a couple hours, we've made this, which is a major part of a plane. But the most important thing isn't that the time we've saved. The most important thing is that it is really, and it is really, really rigid. The first time you build one of these, you will be shocked at how rigid this is relative to any other way that I know of to do it. Got this edge on about a 15-degree angle that you'll never get right. Shouldn't say never, but this is certainly a whole lot better than that. Now what I do, just get a couple little pieces of tape holding this down. And we just want to temporarily tack glue. This is just going to be a temporary joint here. Just temporarily tack glue this in place. Now I've tried to just get one little tack on here. You haven't somehow built a warp into it. It's just the slightest little bit of glue on there. And of course I'll just go right down now, laying the ribs in. Each one, same operation, lay it 1/8 of an inch from the back, put it up on a leading edge. This part goes pretty quickly. As you probably can figure this out, you can make the elevator in about 10 minutes. Oversized to the last minute. Imagine if you got to this point and you had this piece like that. Now what do? You know, one thing I've learned really the hard way is to leave these parts oversized. In fact, we'll leave them oversized by even more than that. See it in the final analysis. And because it's flat right up to about here, and then it starts this very gradual taper. Now if you followed along, a tail like this should be relatively easy to build. It should always come out straight. And if you've used good wood, it should come out relatively light. Now Miss Ashley's tail was a little bit smaller on the tips, but basically the areas were the same. And if you're doing a Cardinal kit, this is the way I would suggest. Just copy this, get a set of Miss Ashley plans, and put your own tips on.
Typhoon had an awful lot of stuff that I had done for the first or second time. The carbon fiber fuselage that I had made, I made it in 2 pieces, like a clamshell, one top, and what you would consider the bottom block. I had built the Miss Ashley carbon fiber fuselage, and of course, I think I'll make a dedicated video of doing a carbon fiber fuselage. I did one for the Tiger Cat too. But what it is when you do a carbon fiber fuselage, you do it very different than you would do a balsa plywood fuselage, and the stress is pretty much the same. What's a little different is getting the finish on without adding a lot of weight. I would never want to do one, not for what I'm doing, with any kind of gel coat. I like to mold it with the carbon fiber and then sand into the fiber itself to make it even lighter than where it would be gel coat. And that has worked. It worked great on the Miss Ashley plane. And even after Miss Ashley crashed, the fuselage was in one piece. So that really stood the test of time pretty well. Now, the silver finish, getting off all the silver on this, again, I wanted this to be as light as possible and have a SAITO 91 that was really in cruise mode. Look at a bird is in the back eating my headphones. Chicky, you got to be on every video, I'm telling you. He's always stealing the show somehow. Anyway, he did live in my shop for 7 years for anybody that was not a follower of the videos back then. And not many things escaped his evil eye, especially if we ordered a pepperoni pizza. He'd go right over, you open a box, and he'd be in the box pulling off a piece of pepperoni for himself. He always had carbon fiber dust on him. He was always dusty. What a great companion he was. What a great companion. Now, in testing out the SAITO 4-stroke engines, and I had run several of them in various planes and test planes before we ever got to this point, and I knew right off the bat the exhaust of the 4-stroke is 100 to 150 degrees hotter than a 2-stroke. So when I engineered up that cowl, I wanted it to be like a hollow eggshell, so as much air would be going past, especially the exhaust side of the engine, and plenty of exhaust area coming out the back. Now, it's just lucky for me, that's pretty, not pretty, it's almost dead scale for the way a real Typhoon is. And a real Typhoon, by the way, does have a very enormous engine that's very heavy, and of course that's why it has a short nose. Now, one of the parts of this that I really wanted to get right, the invasion stripes. There were several pictures in the books, the documentation that I had showing various paint jobs. I wanted to come up with a combination of some parts of every one, but like every finish that I do, it starts out being, before I go anywhere, it's got to be in silver. Final coat of silver with as few flaws as possible. The canopy detail on this plane took a lot of time. I remember that. Things I remember looking back now over the years. And, you know, this is going to be, it's a lot of years, let's be realistic. It's a full take-apart plane, and I wanted to make sure that I would be able to take it apart if I needed to for some reason. But if I didn't need to, it pretty much would stay together forever. One of the things about that I liked is if I ever wanted to, if I had a problem with the tail being heavy or something like that, I could always just make another tail without having to make a whole nother plane. There were a lot of advantages to that. But going back to the paint job, getting the invasion stripes, this is one of the things, when you start out doing it, it looks real easy, it's all done, and you start out doing it and you think, uh-oh, this is going to take a lot of time. Now, the roundels, again, because I had built, up to this point, I built 3 Spitfires. What am I talking about? And I was becoming an expert on how to make roundels, and it never got any easier at the end than the beginning. And I know nowadays, you know, with graphics and computers, we didn't have that back then. There's no graphics and no computers back in this time frame. And the problem of everything is when you have a round circle inside a round circle and it's off a tiny, tiny amount, it looks terrible. Your eye picks it right up. And all of the backmasking and all of the sealing of the edges, I made a template for every piece of the roundel. And this, one of the things I want, of course, it's a British plane. You can't skip this part. This is one of the things you have to just tough it out. And I'd always do, the tricks I always used were do the bottom first. So if you ever had a problem or you ever needed to get your rhythm and, you know, tune up the guitar or whatever, it would, and there was a mistake, it would be on the bottom. But when you do this many roundels, I feel like I joined the British Air Force. So one thing that worked in my favor during the whole construction of this plane, it came out just a little bit underweight every part. The tail came out a little bit lighter than what my tails normally do. The fuselage, being carbon fiber, came out a little bit lighter. The cowl a little bit lighter. So what happened is toward the end of the model, when I'd start adding up all the weights with the grain scale, I said, ooh, we're in great shape. So what it allowed me to do is just to put a little bit extra finish on it, a little bit of extra clear, do a little bit extra buffing, and I didn't have a lot of anxiety because in the past what I'd do is when I get to this point, I'd have to start cutting back on how much clear went on, and oh boy. Now, the squadron letters are KYN. There's no such squadron as KYN, but they go through the invasion stripes. KYN, by the way, anybody doesn't know, is my wife's name, Karen. K-Y-N, and it's not K-A-R-E-N, it's K-A-R-Y-N. So this was the squadron marker for this, and I thought that was kind of cool. And as I started laying it out, and of course the airbrushing and the edging and sealing all the edges, this becomes a big labor of love. But anybody that does any semi-scale model knows it's going to take a lot longer than if you build a typical Cardinal or an Impact or a SV11 or whatever. There's just a lot more work to it, and that's the price you pay. But again, anytime you do this kind of work, any of the models that I make, I resign myself to the fact that this is going to take a long time. So, and I've said it before, it's like going on a long journey in a car. You just resign yourself to it. You don't get disappointed 2 hours into it that you're not in California yet. So, but again, every step of this, again, because it's a take-apart plane, it makes the finishing, the inking, the lettering, this part of it, all the airbrushing, all of the shading, all of the things that would normally, if this airplane were a one-piece airplane, it would have been a nightmare to do a lot of this stuff, where when you can just take the tail off and run a ruler right across the stab, makes it a whole lot easier. And at this point in time, I had built take-apart planes with using the method that I think most people use, and they're very typical. I don't know who gets credit for inventing it, but it doesn't really matter. I didn't invent it, I just copied it. And this,
I had a cap on it before I guess it blew up. Because what was happening, it was putting the burnt oil back into the fuel. But it runs fine, no pressure. It seems to be very uncritical. And there's about not quite 2 turns of needle before it starts going lean and rich, so it's plenty wide range.
But I want it to maintain or look like that three-dimensional look where the silver's in the very center. And it looks like we have it pretty close anyway. Let that dry, and then when we take it off, we'll get a look at how it looks. Now, we did get these kind of sanded, but we don't have weather to paint today, so we're going to let this go and work on Mike's canopy for a little while. Let's do them freelance. Whenever I lay out lines that are going to be 90 degrees, say to a hinge line or to something else, I want to be sure I use a 90-degree triangle. In this case, one piece of tape will hold that in place so it can't wiggle around, and now I can just lay out the tape. Anything that's 90 degrees, because even if this is off just a little bit, it adds a little interest in there, free extra interest. I'll show you how to do ink lines, Ertnowski. I'll show you where panel lines are. Well, I'll tell you, he makes me crazy while I'm working here. Hey! Ink line bird. Little tool that I found handy. I just put some tape on a brand new blade so that I could scrape those corners down. And I noticed it's easier to do it because what you want to have, and you don't want to have the point scratching down. You want to have this laying flat, and you just want to kind of shave it. That seems a lot more effective, and it's easier to control without that big handle on it. I can just scrape the corners with that. Another thing I noticed, I'm trying to get used to using these surgical gloves. The gloves pick up all this little ink, so every once in a while I just go get another pair of gloves. The gloves...
Now, being really honest, using the surgical gloves or any rubber gloves, I have never been comfortable wearing gloves. And usually my hands get pretty well chewed up because I don't wear gloves. For things I probably should anyway. But I tried for a good part of this model to use the gloves, but in the end I think I just gave up. I don't really remember ever looking forward to wearing gloves. I'm not a doctor, that's for sure. So anyway, the ink work, I made some little templates. I did the rows of dots. I wanted to do little lightning holes in the fillets. These are the kind of things that if it's not a take-apart plane, it's hard to get in there and do ink lining inside the fillets. And I thought that would be just one little tiny thing. I wanted to make the exhaust manifolds as realistic. They were molded from polyester resin. I made a little rubber mold for them. Just like on some of the other Spitfires, I think 2 of the Spitfires have molded, the ones with the Griffin engine. But every little detail, and when you think about it, building a straight line stunner is no easy task, that's for sure. Then when you think what goes into a semi-scale, and then one with as many unique features as the Typhoon, It's just a labor of love. Now, it's hard to look back and imagine how much time I put into getting that cowling fit. That cowling fit was like one side of a figure 8, and I needed to get those 2 ink lines parallel, all the Zeus fittings to be kind of looking like they belong there. That little curve into the nose, there's a lot of work went into getting that to look, well, as close as I could possibly get it to the real model anyway. But in the end, it looked like it worked out pretty well. And that little bottom of the fin and rudder, kind of got that right. Oh, and the bird. He was such a good companion. He's going to drink that coffee for me. And having the books, the documentation, and being able to go back and forth with the paint job to come up with something unique, and the canopy detail on this. Now, the neat thing about this, the canopy detail, I could get in and take the canopy out. Just, there were 2 screws holding the canopy in. So if I really wanted to change it or upgrade it, or who knows what, put a new pilot in. Maybe if it didn't fly well, I'd take the pilot out and put him in backwards or something. But then the squadron markings, all the roundels, all the ink work, the only word I know of, a true labor of love. Now, because the exhausts on this were very different than the ones on the Spitfire, I couldn't use the same rubber mold. I made another mold for this model, and they're a little bit different. But again, this is the labor of love that this turns out to be. And I wanted to get the exhaust stains on it as close as I could before I glued them on. And just one of the little details that just takes a lot longer than you think. And again, with this, I wanted to have the ink work to be almost scale if I possibly could, or very close to scale. Now, I've seen a lot of models, and I'm guilty of making them myself, where I just took the drafting template and put random things all over the model. And you can't do that on this kind of a model. This one has to be, you have to have some kind of documentation or idea of what you're trying to do, and then get it looking something like that. Because I think most people, they would know. So anyway, the little SAITO, the nose art, and that came out real nice too. One of the things that I spent a lot of thought on, and back and forth, and trying to figure out how high to make it, where do I put it, how am I going to letter it up. It's all letraset, of course. Now, if this were made in the modern day, we would have a decal made up, and we could do a lot more fancy work. That was all done with letrasets. This is a time, and this was over 20 years ago, that you needed letrasets for everything. And what I try to do when I put my AMA number out on the outer flap, I wanted it to be like just fogged in, not a solid black. I was trying to make it disappear. I always remember the late Al Rabe used to be so annoying to him that you had to put your AMA number on a semi-scale plane, and because obviously it detracts from all the work you put into making it semi-scale. And doing the shading, the airbrushing, this was a big part of this whole model. And just, again, just like all of the models that I've made semi-scale, this, if you overdo it, it looks terrible. So in the course of doing these shading jobs, and in the course of talking to Al Rabe about it many times, I would always say, and I told Al, I said, I think if you're wrong about shading, it's better to have one less than one too many. And he disagreed. But I'd always end the conversation with saying, well, it's okay, Al, it's my model. I don't know if he saw the humor in that. But anyway, now we're getting to the point where this is fun. I got my clear gun ready, and I've got all the little detailing that I wanted to do on it, and I was really thinking, this is such a unique model. Carbon fiber fuselage, full take apart, carbon cowl. And if I were just making a standard Cardinal over and over again and changing the wingtips or something, every model I made in this part of my life was totally different than the one before it. We started with a fresh piece of paper. We started with new concept sketches and whatever. And this one, at this point in time, I was so excited because other people were already interested in flying four-strokes and seeing how well they were going to work out. And it just turned out to be, when I started doing this part of it anyway, I thought, wow, see what I did with the lettering? I just put dots in it to try to make it fade like that. Anyway, I thought there would be a real potential for the 4-stroke. Now, the thing with this plane, because it has a ZTRON in it, Sergio Zegras did the development work on that, and I could control the throttle with it. So when I would fly it, you didn't need anybody to hold it. Of course, we always had, it was usually John DeTavio holding it, just in case. And I'd check the throttle before I'd go out to the handle and release the plane, and I could start from open a throttle. So it added a little fun to it, a little bit of interesting stuff, and an amount of complexity that you normally wouldn't have with with a standard Cardinal or an Impact or a SV11 or whatever. But at this point, all that was left was to make sure the engine was broken in, get a starting idea of what props were going to be appropriate for this. And I had to start right from scratch with props and buy a whole shoebox full of big giant props and start figuring this out. It was a very, very labor intensive thing because I wanted to just have it flying as well as I could. By the time we got to the Nationals, I got to fly at Pal Park many, many times to do all the development work and get it tuned in. It was just so much fun.
Has a nice sharp corner and a nice lock when it's done. So I don't know, I guess I should be, I'm getting spoiled because usually I have a lot more things on my mind to change and do and fool with. I think we need to get some props for this, and then we can start playing with the electronics. We definitely are going to be able to taxi this around. This just rolls up on the main gear like an automatic.
So this is the Nationals, and I did qualify for the top 5. And one of the things that was fun about this model, of course, was always the takeoff and landing. And we go through the end of the pattern. I wanted to show this once. Some people have never seen it. I don't think it'll ever happen again in the event. Maybe it already has, or maybe, I don't think so though. The way this played out, they outlawed the ZTRON the next year. That was done. So now I have the ZTRON in my other hand. I can slow the motor down, and actually during the flight I could have slowed the motor down in various spots that I wanted it slow. I can taxi it with the engine running on the mains. The engine is still running, and I thought this was just as cool as it gets. Pull it right up in front of the judges and shut the engine off. And I thought that was just as cool as it got. And a lot of people didn't think I was ever going to be able to do that, and you know what? They were wrong. Now looking back, it's been over 20 years. The Typhoon is still in my mind as one of the projects that, here I am at 79 years old, looking back at my life and wondering if you're familiar with the poem The Dash. What did I do with my dash? And here it is. Anyway, that's a funny way to put it. Anyway, I thought my modeling friends would enjoy seeing some of this. Maybe a lot of people have not seen this, any part of the Windy videos. That there's probably 100 videos that cover this. And back in the day, this was what I did every day. I'd have my Dravalia coffee and go down to the shop and dream and scheme, and it was a great time of my life building these semi-scale models. I look back and I didn't leave anything for tomorrow. I put it all out on the field with these models, and I don't regret 1 minute at a time. I had a great life, and I enjoyed every minute of it and all the friends I made along the way. Now, if you enjoyed the video, please take a minute, hit the like button. Go to the playlist feature of our channel. All the modeling videos are in one spot. And again, I hope you did enjoy the video. And thanks so much, everybody, so much for watching.